Easily the greatest thing to happen to Linux is Linus being a cocky university student, not listening to OS professors, and thinking this Linux kernel was a good idea. Without that, it probably wouldn't have made its way past the stage of just being a project to learn how his CPU worked. Arguably the second greatest thing, and there's certainly some room for debate here, is the Steam machines. Not because they sold well, not because the way they were executed was even a good idea. They were a commercial failure, but because of the path they sent Valve down, because they hired developers working on DXVK and other components which went on to make Proton, because they paid for contract work on KDE through Blue Systems, now move over to Tech Paladin, and because they created the SteamDeck and are continuing to support it, not just through the minor model updates like the OLED version, but continuing to support it software-wise, and having a general commitment to making Linux a viable gaming platform, much more so than when Wine was just kind of doing their own thing. Not because upstream Wine is bad, but it's not focused on gaming, it's just generally focused on Windows support. Those of us who were paying attention about a decade ago may still remember why it is that Valve, and notably Gabe Newell, seem to have this just eternal interest in Linux as a gaming platform, even though it's still a very small gaming platform. But I feel like it's been long enough now that a lot of people either just don't know because they, were not around on Linux or paying attention to Linux at the time, or have just forgotten about it. I saw this post the other day with this amazing graphic. What is Valve's long game in investing so much into Linux gaming? Is it to be less reliant on Microsoft and create a more open system for their marketplace and gaming? And I get that people just don't know about this now. That gives me something to talk about. Now, to understand how we got here, we need to go back before the launch of the Steam Deck, before the launch of Proton, even before the launch of the Steam machines themselves. Back to the launch of Windows 8. Valve boss Gabe Newell calls Windows 8 a catastrophe. Mr. Newell, who worked for Microsoft for 13 years on Windows, yes, that is actually a part of his lore, said his company had embraced the open source software Linux as a hedging strategy designed to offset some of the damage Windows 8 was likely to do. We want to make it as easy as possible for the 2,500 games on Steam to run on Linux as well, said Mr. Newell. Windows 8 is a catastrophe for everyone in the PC space. This is a little bit before the Linux client actually came out for Steam. That released in 2013, this is 2012. But this is not the first time that Valve has been involved in Linux. Their first game server for Linux released in 1999. We've been a free rider, and we've been able to benefit from everything that went into PCs and the internet, he told the conference, and we have to continue to figure out how there will be open platforms. There's a strong temptation to close the platform, he said, because they look at what they can accomplish when they limit the competitors' access to the platform, and they say, that's really exciting. This is seen by some commentators to be a reference to the inclusion of a Windows store in the Microsoft operating system. At this point, this is kind of something that is just here and basically accepted. Most people don't really use it as their primary way of getting software, but a lot of people were genuinely worried about the Windows Store being included, because people were starting to think that, are we going to go down the route of Android and iOS, where that's basically the only way that you can distribute software? And when you're Valve and your entire business is based around having a storefront that you sell games through, you don't want to have that store on top of another store and then part of your cut goes to that store. Nobody in the company would want that. And not just that, Valve was worried about having competition directly in the operating system and game developers moving their games out of Steam onto that platform instead, having something which they don't really have any way to compete with because it's directly built into the operating system, and you can't really make it any easier than that. Now, did that come to pass? No, not really. There was this period where Microsoft just wasn't publishing games on PC because I guess they forgot they also made Windows, and there was also a period where they were only publishing their games onto the Microsoft Store and weren't putting them on Steam. That has since changed, and now they're focused on distributing games through Game Pass, but they are still selling the games on Steam. So for Valve, they've basically come out on top here. But there was definitely a worry that this was not just going to be a Microsoft thing, but a lot of other publishers were going to do the same thing. We think the future is very different from successes we've had in the past, he said. When you're playing a game, you are trying to think about creating value for other players, so the line between content, player, and creator is really fuzzy. He was even thinking about content creation. I actually didn't read this quote before the video. I was going to stop it slightly higher. He even had thoughts about content creation at the time. This isn't about video games, he said. It's about thinking about goods and services in a digital world. Now, shortly after this article, there was this one that also got released. Null says TV PCs to compete with consoles. This was December of 2012. Now, a few months after this article, in December of 2012, Null says TV PCs to compete with consoles. Valve co-founder says Valve will be one of the many manufacturers. By this point, the Steam machines were not announced. Nobody outside of Valve knew about the Steam machines. But considering Gabe was talking about this, we were well into engineering samples, the idea was pretty much settled, and it was very likely going to happen at this point, and then it happened a couple of years later in 2014. He said it's a matter of when, not if, these turnkey solutions begin competing with next-gen hardware from Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony. Now, did the original Steam machines do that? No. No, but we'll get to something that did a bit later. I think in general that most customers and developers are going to find that the PC is a better environment for them, because they won't have to split the world into thinking about why are my friends in the living room, why are my video source in the living room different from everyone else. So in a sense, we hopefully are going to unify those environments. Now, the unification did end up happening in a different way, and a lot of younger gamers are playing all of their games on a phone, which I'm not a fan of, but hopefully Valve can keep pushing down this route. Null said Valve's current goal is making PCs work better in the living room. After that, they hope to ramp up work on Steam's Linux version, which would make it easier for the developer to create custom hardware. While the hardware will by design have a more controlled environment, Null said general purpose PCs will still be a valued part of the ecosystem. And not long after this, we got the original Steam machines, which, to put it lightly, were a commercial failure and basically dead on arrival. Nobody bought them. Yes, people really liked the Steam controller. I know people really like the Steam controller. There's still people that swear by it today, and I'm surprised that nobody has made something similar to this. I don't know if Valve has some sort of patent on it, but I kind of want Valve to make something in this direction as well. Anyway, this had the problem of just never getting the level of third-party developer support that Valve really needed to make it viable. Developers, yes, there were some that did port to Linux, but Proton wasn't a thing at this point, so the only option was porting to Linux, and if you don't have the market there, a lot of publishers are just not going to do it. It's a chicken and egg problem. You need the market there for publishers to adopt it, and you need publishers there for players to adopt it so they can actually have games to play. And there were certainly games, but they were on other platforms. So if you're on another platform, you can just play it there, and unless you're really dedicated to Linux, or I guess the mission of Valve, there wasn't really a good reason for it. And many years later, Gabe Newell did talk about the failure. Gabe Newell opens up on why Steam machines didn't work out in the latest Edge magazine published in 2020. The hardware we were pushing was super incomplete at the time. I don't know if it's necessarily the hardware was incomplete or the software support for the hardware. Basically same diff. I thought, this is clearly where we all want to end up, and this is a point along the pathway to get there. And people were like, yes, but you're asking me to pay money for the privilege of being on your roadmap, and I'm not really sure what I'm getting out of it at this time. We needed to be a lot further along in terms of delivering polished consumer experiences before we were trying to get people to actually pay money for those things. If there's a silver lining to this, it's that Neil discussed with Edge how Valve learned key lessons from the Steam machines and how it impacted their design philosophy. Neil said the combination of Index and Half-Life Alyx, to my mind, is where we were always hoping we would get to, which is the ability to be designing hardware and software in concert with each other, providing a clear justification for why you are buying the hardware. Even if things are not in a perfect state today, giving people a reason they should want it. The Steam machines failed because they were basically just a PC running Debian with no games. And at the time, there were plenty of PCs running Debian with no games. That was every Linux system with Steam installed. It didn't really have anything else over what you could already just do yourself for free. And I think it's completely fair to say that this change in direction very much inspired what happened with the Steam Deck. So come 2018, introducing a new version of Steam Play. This is when we saw the launch of Proton and the amazing list of supported games, with the most important one here being Nier Automata. If you don't know, this is the reason that DXVK exists. The original developer of the project really wanted to play it on Linux, and that was their primary goal. Now it's expanded for many other things, and I'm happy it did. And then come 2022, the Steam Deck launched. Now, before the Steam Deck, Linux gaming was already completely viable. Most games were working. Some games had issues. I remember playing, Ty the Tasmanian Tiger, and the waterfall texture just wouldn't load, so you just had this, like, pink waterfall, which was quite amusing. Since that point, most just single-player game issues completely ironed out. I can just buy a new game now. I don't even check, like, if it's gonna work, and it usually just worked with the main version of Proton. Sometimes you have issues with games like Persona 5, where they have slight issues, and then they have Denuvo, and then Denuvo bans you from the game because you're changing Proton versions, and Proton versions are considered new PCs. But outside of cases like that, it just works now. And the Steam Deck is very clearly designing the hardware and the software in concert. Even if Linux gaming is not in a perfect state, even if there are cases of games like Apex Legends which don't work on Linux, the Steam Deck provides a use case for the games that already exist. It is a handheld gaming PC. So even though those games don't work, you can still take it on the go. And for a lot of people, that is really valuable, especially a lot of people who they spend a lot of time on public transport. Or if you don't spend time on public transport, you just want to lay down on the couch and play games. And yes, there are things like the Switch, but then you're limited to the catalog available on the Switch. And yes, there is your phone, but then you're playing mobile games. This was a handheld PC, and it's certainly not the first, but it was the first that made it actually affordable to get one at the level of power you would want. The Steam Deck, it is that turnkey solution which competes with Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. And yes, it might need a bit of a power upgrade, hopefully sometime soon, maybe in the next year or two. I would very much like to see a new model of the Steam Deck. But even with this being the case, even with a lot of modern games being a little bit iffy, especially as we start moving more into this age of UE5 terribly optimized games with ray tracing everywhere, you can still play a lot of games. There's still a lot of games that work on the platform, and that's amazing. We are still very far from the goal of it being a perfect gaming platform, a complete replacement for Windows gaming. But we are very much moving in that direction, and this has been the goal of Valve for the past bit over a decade. And yes, I am fully aware this is not being done out of the goodness of their heart. This is not being done because they just want to do charity work and make Linux an amazing platform and freedom and yay, that's amazing. I'm sure there's a part of that, and certainly engineers are definitely involved in that direction. But at the end of the day, Valve wants to have a platform that they can be certain that nobody can stop them selling games on, that nobody's going to take a cut from them, that they can continue to make tons and tons of money. But at the end of the day, our goals align. They want to make money by selling games on Linux. I want to play games on Linux. It's a win-win to me. Now, going briefly back to 2013, there was a talk at LinuxCon by Gabe Newell, and I would highly recommend you go and check this out. This was uploaded in 2021, but it is much, much older than that, as you can tell by the video being horribly low quality and Gabe being somewhat less old than he is now. This is an amazing talk. I highly recommend check it out. Linked down below. So, if you didn't know, I hope you learned something, and if you did know but you forgot about it, I hope you're reminded. Let me know your thoughts down below. Do you game on Linux? When did you start gaming on Linux? Was it with the SteamDeck? Was it with Proton? Was it pre-Proton? I'd love to know. Yeah, go like the video, go subscribe. I forget my outro sometimes. If you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, Scribes, Daily Bearer Pay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and long game.
Something like this.